You're not part of the plan anymore. Sable's family only. Everything's covered. Thanks again for handling the finances. That was the text my son sent me at 10 p.m. Not a question mark. Not an apology. Not an invitation to reconsider. Just a brief notification, like my name being struck from a reservation list. One line. No, Mom, at the beginning. No, I love you at the end. Just a single, clear message. My role was over. And that role was the one who paid the bills. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by small plastic bags and rolls of tape still scattered on the tablecloth. I had just sealed the last goodie bag, for my granddaughter, Juniper. Inside were soft peppermint candies, a pack of sea turtle stickers, and a keychain that said, "Aloha, Grandma loves you." I'd used a fine-tipped black marker to write, "For Juniper, love, Grandma Eve." I had done it for each of them, a separate bag for each child. Tate likes superheroes? Check. Juniper prefers mints to chocolate? Remembered that too. I even printed out little anti-motion sickness labels to stick on the back, because Sable once mentioned that Juniper gets airsick. I had just set the bag down when my phone lit up. The screen read, "Griffin Thorne." I picked it up without a second thought. Maybe he was asking about flight times. Maybe he wanted to change the airport shuttle schedule. But no. It was that text. You're not part of the plan anymore. Sable's family only. Everything's covered. Thanks again for handling the finances. I read it once. It didn't register. The second time, my heart clenched. I didn't react. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't make a sound. I just sat there. It was as if all the noise in my head had been vacuumed out. The kitchen suddenly felt bigger, emptier, strangely colder. Tate's goodie bag slid off the edge of the table. The name tag fluttered away, a piece of tape still stuck to my fingertip. I didn't bend down to pick it up. I held my phone, opened the message thread again, and typed a simple reply. "Do you need me to bring anything else? The ginger cookies Juniper likes." I knew I was asking a question that already had an answer. But maybe I needed one final confirmation that this was real. A moment later, a message came through. From Juniper. Or rather, from her mother, Sable, using Juniper's phone. "Mom says we don't need anything else, Grandma." I set my phone down. As gently as if a harder motion might shatter me. I didn't cry. I'd lost my husband. I know how grief can gnaw at you for years. But this pain, the quiet way you can be erased from something you yourself created, it wasn't pain. It was white. A colorless, soundless, reasonless void. I looked at my hands. The piece of tape was still stuck to my fingertip. A tiny paper cut next to my nail, probably from opening the wrapping paper roll. I used to be a mother. I was the one who stayed up all night with Griffin when he had a fever at 3 years old. The one who cut his toenails for him when he broke his leg at summer camp. The one who dipped into my retirement savings to help him with the down payment on his house. And now, what was I? I was the one who had covered everything. I was the one left out of the plan. I was a line item on a bank statement. I turned off the kitchen light. The goodie bags were still there, Tate's not yet tied shut. The fallen label was on the floor, stuck fast to the edge of a tile. I walked into the living room and sat in Caleb's old leather armchair, the one where he used to read the paper every morning. I didn't turn on a light. I let the darkness wrap around me like a blanket, odorless, wordless, but at least, it couldn't betray me. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not from a good night's sleep. The opposite. I'd barely slept at all. But an old body gets used to waking before the sun is fully in the window. That was a habit Caleb had left behind. I made a pot of coffee but only drank half a cup. The rest grew cold on the kitchen counter. I looked at it the way I looked at myself, cooling, bit by bit, with no one to ask, no one to care. I stood up and opened the window. The early morning air in Ventura was pleasant, crisp, with a faint smell of salt from the distant sea. I thought. I used to find peace in this scent. Not anymore. Now it only reminded me of what I had traded for the past 3 years. For that trip. For them. 3 years. That's how long I'd been collecting every dollar, every shred of belief, every small dream, like someone folding tiny notes of wishes and stuffing them into a glass jar. My jar had a handwritten label, Hope. I kept it behind a vase of dried flowers on the kitchen cabinet. Anyone would have thought it was just for decoration, but for me, it was where I kept my reason to hope. It all started after Caleb died. The house became unnervingly quiet. But what I remember most was the first night I went to bed and didn't hear his snoring. He always snored loudly, in short, rhythmic bursts that would have annoyed a stranger. But to me, it was the rhythm of his presence. And the night he was gone, the silence jolted me awake, panicked because I couldn't hear anything. Then one morning, I opened his closet. The shirt he'd worn for the last time, a pale blue, with the sleeves neatly rolled, was still hanging there. I brought my face close. It still smelled of sunshine and laundry soap. I hadn't washed it since he passed. I folded it and placed it in a zip-top bag, as if preserving the evidence that he had been here. After the funeral, when the flowers were cleared and everyone had left, I started thinking about Hawaii, the place he and I had gone on our honeymoon. We were so poor then, we flew on discount tickets, stayed in a motel, and ate sandwiches wrapped in foil, splitting every meal. But Caleb kept saying, "You smile every time you smell coconut, so I have to take you where the coconuts are." I remember he snuck a hotel-branded towel, not to steal it, but to wipe the sand off my shoes. I still have that towel. It's in the drawer next to my bed. It has a few stains, but I've never washed it. Like the shirt, it's a part of a memory I haven't rinsed clean. 3 months after the funeral, I started clearing out his study. There was a bookshelf, filled with old books, their pages yellowed. Each one smelled of time. I took a few to the flea market to sell. The hardest one to part with was Moby Dick. Not because it was rare, but because on the inside cover he had written, "For Eve, my lighthouse." I remember holding that book for a long time before placing it on the selling table. Someone haggled. I nodded. But that night, I opened the closet again and cried without a sound. And then I took that money, along with a few tens, a few fives, and started dropping them into the hope jar. I cancelled my cable subscription. I stopped my newspaper delivery. Whenever friends invited me for coffee or lunch, I'd decline, making an excuse about saving up to fix the roof. No one ever asked twice. I started teaching English online. At my age, wearing a headset for hours gave me a headache, but I did it. My students from Korea, Brazil, Italy. None of them knew I was an old woman trying to save enough money to take my family to Hawaii. They just knew me as Miss Eve, the one who always had hot tea in her mug and never turned off her camera. I used to jot down notes in a little notebook every time I earned more money. The last page read, "Plane tickets, done. Villa, deposit paid. Luau tour, seats for 9 confirmed." Yes. 9 people. Including me. I pictured an evening by the sea. Griffin would place a photo of Caleb in the middle of the dinner table. I'd bring lavender candles, and each of us would light one and share a memory of him. Juniper would say, "Grandpa taught me how to make a flute out of a drinking straw." Sable would say, "He wrapped a gift for me my first year as his daughter-in-law, because my own mother lived so far away." Griffin would be quiet, his eyes misty, his hand resting on his father's picture. And I would be there, holding my granddaughter's hand, and I would say, "Your grandfather loved the ocean. But he loved it more because he got to share it with me." I had imagined that scene so many times it was memorized. Like a movie. Like a ritual. I thought, if I could bring the family back to where Caleb and I began, maybe they would remember where their family began, too. So I didn't just book tickets. I called the agent to ask about seating for the elderly, because Sable's mother has a bad leg. I checked if the villa had enough space for the kids to play. I even had matching t-shirts designed, with everyone's name, and the phrase, "Family is forever, 2023. I did all of it without wanting any credit. I just thought, one day when I'm no longer here, at least they would remember. Grandma Eve did this for her family. I didn't think I wouldn't be invited. Wouldn't have a seat at the table. Wouldn't get to light a candle. Wouldn't be in the picture. I never imagined that after 3 years of saving every penny, what I would get in return was an empty seat, at the very table I had imagined us all sharing. After last Thanksgiving, I started to realize I wasn't in the center anymore. I hadn't noticed it before, because my heart was too busy. Busy worrying about others. Busy hoping. And sometimes, hope can make you blind. That day, Sable had just finished setting out the mashed potatoes when she clapped her hands together and smiled. Okay, small group photo first. Just our immediate family. I was standing by the table, a napkin still in my hand. I smiled and nodded out of habit. No one looked back at me. They lined up by the fireplace. Griffin, Sable, the 2 kids, and Sable's mother, Irene, standing in the middle with her cane. The twinkling lights from the Christmas tree reflected off her red-rimmed glasses. I took a step, as if to join them. Then I stopped. Because no one looked at me, and no one called me over. After they took their immediate family picture, I heard someone say, "Now let's get one with Aunt and Uncle." Yeah. 2 more people will fit perfectly. No one mentioned me. I wiped my hands again on the napkin and went into the kitchen. I refilled the water pitcher for the tea. I could still hear the click of the camera behind me. I thought about going back and asking to be in a photo, but my throat felt like wood. I didn't know how to ask without making them think I was being needy. I washed my hands, wiped down the sink, and walked back out just as they were serving dessert. Last Christmas was even clearer. The whole family had planned to wear matching red sweaters, hand-knit style with a white pine tree pattern. I knew because Juniper had texted me a picture of the design 2 weeks earlier. I'd searched all afternoon at Macy's, but they were out of my size. I asked Griffin, "Are you buying them as a group? Let me chip in for mine." He'd said, "It's okay, Mom. You probably wouldn't like those sweaters anyway." I didn't think much of it. But then, that evening, when I walked into the living room, the entire family was already posing for a photo by the tree. Everyone was wearing the matching sweater. Except for me. In my old, navy blue one. I whispered to Sable as I offered her the plate of cookies. "Did they run out of my size?" She smiled, her eyes never leaving her phone. "No. I didn't know you were coming." I stood there, holding the cookie plate, frozen. Not because of the sweater, but because of the phrase, "I didn't know you were coming," as if my presence wasn't expected, wasn't planned for, wasn't part of the script for the family gathering. I stood there for a few more seconds, then went to pour myself a cup of tea. My blue sweater became the one out-of-place spot in every photo that night. And I knew I would never ask for a copy. By Juniper's birthday, I still hadn't given up. I woke up early and baked a blueberry coffee cake from my old recipe. The kind she'd loved since she was a little girl with sticky hands and pigtails. I even bought a number 10 candle. Silver, with glitter. I packed the cake in an insulated carrier and took the bus to Griffin's house. The house was already full of people. They were in the middle of singing, "Happy Birthday." I smiled and nodded to everyone. I hadn't even opened the cake box when I saw Sable carry out a chocolate layer cake. Huge, beautiful, on a 3-tiered stand. I stood still for a second. Juniper hugged her mother, squealing, "A cake from my favorite bakery." I hid the blueberry cake behind my back. I figured I'd wait until the party thinned out and offer her a piece later. But then Sable said, right on cue, "She's on a different diet now. Her stomach has been so sensitive this week." Hearing that, I didn't know what to say. I distinctly remembered that my recipe was dairy-free. I'd switched to canola oil and almond milk. I'd spent an hour on Google just to be sure. But I just nodded and took the cake box home. The lid was never opened. I put it in the fridge. A few days later, I took it to the church to donate to the senior support group. No one asked where it came from. They ate every last piece. Even something as small as sending a picture of my cat went unnoticed. That day, I took a picture of Lucy, my old cat, sleeping with one paw draped over a gift box, as if she were guarding it. I thought it was cute, so I sent it to the family group chat. No one responded. Not an icon, not a word. A few hours later, someone shared a picture of Sable in a new dress, red, standing in front of a mirror, holding a glass of wine. Griffin immediately replied, "Thumbs up." I stared at that message, that simple thumbs up, and felt my heart shrink. I used to be the first person Griffin called when he had something to say that he couldn't tell anyone else. I used to be the place he offloaded his fears, hid his tears, and asked for advice. And now, what was I? The sender of the only message no one replied to. A ghost in the family group chat. My breaking point didn't come with a shout. It came with silence. The coldest silence is when you're still invited, still present, but not counted. I was being cropped out of the picture long before I was cut from the trip. I used to be the frame. Now, I wasn't even in the background. I couldn't sleep that night. My body was tired, but my mind was a machine stuck in a loop with no off switch. I turned on the kitchen lamp around 2 a.m., made a cup of chamomile tea, and sat down with my old laptop. It was the one Caleb had bought me for my retirement. Silver, a little scratched at the corners. I kept it, never upgrading, partly because I was used to it, and partly because it made me feel like I was still in control of something. I opened the folder labeled Hawaii Trip Master. I'd named it as a private joke to myself, as if I were the director of some grand expedition, which, in a way, I was. I had coordinated everything: flight schedules, destinations, head counts, special tours for the kids, and even a gluten-free menu for Sable's mother. Each time I completed a step, I'd save a new version, numbered in sequence. There was a color palette for the family t-shirts, a list of measurements for the right sizes, and notes on each child's eating habits. I worked like a diligent secretary, only no one had hired me. I scrolled to the banking file, Master Travel Fund, linked. I opened it. The screen clearly showed 6 subcards linked to my account: resort, final payment scheduled airline, paid in full rental car, hold pending excursions, snorkel and amp, luau meal packages, kid-friendly plan emergency access, Thorn, authorized. I stared at it for a few seconds. I remembered agreeing to let Griffin use a supplementary card for convenience, because he'd said Sable was too busy at the time. I didn't question it. I used to believe that if I was a mother, trusting my son was the bare minimum. I clicked on the Transaction History tab. Scrolling down, I recognized all the big, initial payments. Until I saw this line: refund reallocation, $1,000, travel up, Thorn linked card. I frowned. This transaction code wasn't on the main itinerary. I clicked for details. The description was brief: adjustment, upgraded ticket, refund offset. It was sometime in mid-April. I tried to remember, and then it hit me. Griffin had called me one Saturday morning. I was at the local library, helping with the children's reading group. My phone buzzed. He spoke quickly, his voice a little flustered. "Mom, listen, I accidentally booked the wrong tickets for us. Upgraded seats. It's non-refundable. They're asking for the difference. Can you front it for now? I'll pay you back." I remember nodding without a second thought. I even said, "It's okay, honey. As long as it's booked, that's what matters. I'll take care of it." And then I forgot. Not completely, but I let it go, like all the other times I'd helped him out and then forgot about it. Because I was his mother. And mothers help. I flipped open my little notebook, the one I called my promise folder. In it, I'd written down things I promised myself after Caleb died. Not grand resolutions, just small reminders, things I didn't want to repeat. First page, first line: Don't pay for an upgrade if you aren't given a seat. I read that line again, 3 times. My heart slowed, but each beat felt deeper. Every word was no longer a reminder but a warning. That had come too late. I realized I hadn't just given them money. I had given them my seat at the dinner table on the beach, next to Caleb's picture, to people who had no intention of letting me sit there. I took a sip of tea. It was cold. I hadn't noticed. I opened the confirmation email from the travel agency again. My name was not on the guest list. 8 people. Not me. But the transaction was still in my name. The account was still mine. I thought about that, the way I was written out of the plan but was still expected to underwrite it. I was the sponsor. Nothing more. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not even hurt anymore. It was clarity. A feeling so sharp, so distinct. As if I'd just pulled back a curtain and seen the truth, without needing an admission, without needing an apology. I woke up before the alarm went off. When I opened my eyes, the sky outside the window hadn't even started to change color. There were no cars, no voices, just the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, as steady as an old whisper. I didn't turn on any lights. I moved through the dimness, knowing every object in this house by heart, from the small pot of mint to the wooden bench by the wall where Caleb used to sit and tie his shoes. I boiled water and dropped a peppermint tea bag into a cream-colored ceramic mug with the words, "Be still," printed on the side. A birthday gift from Juniper when she was 6. I had planned to take this mug to Hawaii, to sip from it while watching the early morning sea. But there would be no Hawaii. Not for me. I sat down at the dining table, holding the mug. The tea was hot, but I felt nothing. As if my mouth had gone numb, too. I opened my phone. No new notifications from Griffin. Nothing from Sable's side of the family. A complete silence, as if last night had never happened. As if they believed I would quietly step aside, just as I always had. Or maybe they didn't think at all. They simply didn't think of me. I opened my banking app. My finger trembled, but my eyes didn't. No tears. No stinging. The screen lit up, familiar. I saw the green text in the top corner. Travel fund, active. Below it were the linked cards. Resort. Airline. Tour. Rental. Meals. A small line read, linked cards, 6 billing owner, Evelyne Thorne. I took a long, deep breath. Then I opened my text messages. I typed one line, "I can bring the motion sickness bands for Juniper. I remember she gets carsick." I reread it. I deleted "she" and typed "the little one." But then I changed it back. I didn't want to write anything different from what was in my heart. I hit send. I placed the phone face down, then stood up. I walked out to the back porch and checked the security camera mounted on the wooden post by the birdbath, the one Caleb had installed by hand. He used to laugh and say, "The birds will remember this spot longer than our own family will." I looked at the monitor. A sparrow was perched right on the edge. It stood perfectly still, not flying away. The first light of morning was just enough to cast its shadow on the water. I smiled. Not a big smile, just a small nod in my heart. I whispered, "You're still here." "So am I." I went back inside and sat down at the laptop again. The screen was still open. The tea was cold now. I didn't drink anymore. I reopened the banking app. My finger slid to the account settings. An option appeared, "Freeze all transactions, all linked cards will be disabled. Manual authorization required to resume." I read that line like a declaration. My eyes stared at the word "freeze," as if it were the only door I could walk through. No one was standing behind me to hold my hand back. Not Caleb. Not Griffin. Not an apology. I told myself, "It's time." I pressed the button. A dialog box appeared, pale gray, with clear text. "Are you sure? Linked cards will be disabled immediately." I took a breath. And I pressed yes. At 8:15 a.m., I hit the button to freeze the account. No one knew. No alarms went off. No bells rang in anyone's house. Just a single confirmation on my screen. All linked transactions are now frozen. I sat staring at it for a long moment. Then, in a strange new habit, I closed the laptop gently, my hands resting on the lid for a few extra seconds. It was a slow, old kind of exhale, the kind I used to see Caleb do when he closed his briefcase after a long day at City Hall. I said to myself, for the first time in years, I've taken back control without raising my hand to ask permission. Around 8:40, my phone started buzzing. First, a text. The name that popped up. Griffin. The first message was simple. Mom, the card's not working. Can you check on it? I placed the phone face down. I made a new cup of tea, this time peppermint ginger. I always preferred it sent to overly fragrant teas. It was comforting without being fake. The second text came immediately after. We're at the airport. About to check in. The system is declining the card. Can you please look at it? I took the first sip of tea. It wasn't too hot, but it was soothing on my throat. I looked out at the backyard and saw a pair of doves cooing on the wooden fence. I didn't think much about anything, just that the scene was beautifully quiet. The phone rang. FaceTime. Sable. I wasn't going to answer, but I pressed the button to accept the call, because I wanted to look directly into the eyes of the person who had removed me from the trip I had created. The screen filled with the chaotic scene of an airport, a line of people behind them, the sound of a boarding announcement in the distance. Griffin stood to one side, his face flushed red. Sable held the phone, her expression still composed, but her lips were a thin, hard line. The card isn't working, she said, without preamble. What did you do to the account? I didn't answer. I just looked straight into her eyes. Sable tilted her head, then turned the phone toward Juniper, who was sitting on a suitcase, hugging the little blue teddy bear I'd given her. Sable said quietly, "Ask your grandma." Juniper looked up. She hesitated for a second, then brought the phone closer. "Grandma, Mom told me to ask if you can help." I looked at my granddaughter, her innocent face, but her eyes were no longer a child's eyes. Not that she understood, but I could see. She was learning something a child shouldn't have to learn so early. How to ask for something she didn't understand, on behalf of an adult. I swallowed hard. I loved that little girl. I had rocked her to sleep, rubbed her back when she got sick in the car. I had sat with her in the emergency room when she broke her arm roller skating. But her eyes, right now, they hurt me in a different way. Because I knew, she wasn't the one who was wrong. But she was being taught how to be a part of what was wrong. I reached out and ended the call. Then, I opened my phone and went back to the banking app. In the corner of the screen, a small line of text appeared. Frozen. Manual reauthorization required. I swiped my finger to the settings and turned off all sound notifications from the banking app. It was as if I were disconnecting an old circuit, the one that connected my wallet to my silence. I didn't want to hear it chime if someone tried to withdraw from me again. I was no longer responsible. At 9:10 a.m., I received an email. Subject: Booking cancellation confirmation. Pacific Sunset Villa. I opened it. The content was simple, polite. Dear Ms. Evelyne Thorne, we are writing to confirm the cancellation of your reservation at Pacific Sunset Villa, as requested by the primary account holder. All payments will be refunded according to our policy. We hope to welcome you in the future. I read it 3 times. Not for clarity, but to savor it. Every single word. I put the phone down. I leaned my head back against the chair. Nothing in the room had changed. But something inside me had. There was no more feeling of having to apologize for spending my own money. No more feeling of sitting at a party without a seat. No more waiting to have my name called. I had called my own name. And this time, I heard it. I didn't look at my phone for the rest of the afternoon. I left it face down, a new habit, like turning my back on a past I no longer wanted to carry. I spent the afternoon cleaning the kitchen. Not because it was dirty, but because keeping my hands busy kept my mind from spinning. I took out a scrub brush and scoured the stone countertops, then wiped down the underside of the faucet. These were the places people rarely noticed, but I did. Around 3 o'clock, I made myself an iced coffee, the half-calf blend I always bought from the local shop, and sat in the wooden chair by the window. A light breeze from the ocean began to drift through the screen. I didn't turn on a fan or the radio. The house was so quiet I could hear a sparrow's claws tapping on the iron window box outside. I pulled open the drawer of the end table. Inside was a dark brown leather-bound journal. It wasn't glossy, the corners were slightly worn, and it smelled of old leather. Caleb had used it as a logbook when he was the city's head of planning. I hadn't opened it in years. I placed the journal on the table. I ran my hand over the words he had written long ago in blue ink. Keep notes on what matters. The rest will forget itself. I turned to the first blank page. I picked up a pen. And I wrote. Not a list of people to invite. No. I wrote a simple title, The Unphotographed. The first name I wrote, Lois Fairchild. We were in the same yoga class at the community center. She was a small woman with silver hair that fell to her shoulders, and she often forgot the last few poses of each session. Not because she was careless, but because chemo left her tired. One day it was raining, and she couldn't get anyone to pick her up. I drove her home. She sat in the back, clutching her bag, silent. When I asked if anyone was waiting for her at home, she said quietly, "No one's been waiting for me since 2 Christmases ago." The second name, Odette Marlowe. We met at church, at the Wednesday meeting for older women. My car had stalled that day. I was sitting on the steps, about to call for a tow. Odette, a tall woman, her back slightly stooped, walked over. She didn't ask many questions, just held out her car keys. "Get in. We don't have time to wait around for each other anymore." Odette had been a nurse, retired early to care for her husband after his stroke. He passed away 4 years ago. Since then, she lived alone, gardened, and baked cookies for the library. No one at church knew her name. They just called her the lady with the white hair. The third name, Selma Quinn. She used to be the librarian at the local library. I met her during Children's Story Hour. Not as the storyteller, but as the woman who sat in the back row, listening. She came every week. Once, I sat next to her and asked if she had grandchildren. Selma smiled and said, "I do, but they only send pictures, not invitations." I had seen her run her hand over the spines of books as if she were caressing memories. The way she moved so quietly, sat so still, asked for nothing, it made me think, she was more like me than I had realized. I wrote those 3 names in steady, even letters. Not rushed, not shaky. As if I were carving them into a piece of wood. Each stroke had its own meaning. I sat quietly, looking at those 3 names for a long time. Then I put down the pen. I picked up my phone. I found Lois's number first. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello." Her voice was a little hoarse, but not weary. I smiled softly. "Lois, it's me, Evelyne." "Oh. Hello, Eve. Is everything all right?" "It's not a yoga day. I remember it's our day off." I took a shallow breath, then spoke slowly. "I know. I'm calling because I'm taking a trip to Hawaii. For a week. I've rented a villa near the ocean. It's not a big group, just 4 of us. And I'd like you to come." Silence. Then Lois said, her voice full of suspicion, "Hawaii? Are you going to ask me to pay for something?" I laughed. Not a loud laugh, but a real one. "No. No one has to pay for anything. Just pack warm clothes, a wide-brimmed hat, and a comfortable pair of sandals." "Why me?" "Because I think it's time someone remembered you're still here. And I'm done waiting for other people to do it." Lois didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing softly. Then she said, "I'll go." I called Odette, then Selma. Each of them reacted the same way, with shock, with caution, and then with a tremor in their voice. As if they had spent their whole lives being invited late, or not at all. I saved the dates. I marked the departure day. I called the travel agency myself and rebooked the villa, this time for 4, with no request for high chairs, no tours designed for a family unit. Just a group of women who had been overlooked, now being called by name, in their own voices. That was the moment I realized, I could be cut from someone else's plan. But I couldn't be cut from my own. I was no longer the one sending texts that no one answered. I was the one picking up the phone, and making the call. We arrived in Maui on a late afternoon in March. The sky was so clear I could see the reflection of the clouds on the ocean. From the plane, the sea stretched out below, a vast expanse of blue, silent and majestic, like a thoughtful grandmother, one who knew all the secrets but didn't feel the need to tell them. When the plane landed, Lois took my hand. She didn't say anything, just held it. Her hand was thin, her nails cut short, but I could feel the gentle pressure. A squeeze just firm enough to say, "Thank you," without a word. The rental van took us to the villa. It wasn't the large one I had originally booked for my family, the one with the sprawling backyard, the saltwater pool, and a dining room big enough for 9 people to sit without anyone feeling squeezed. No, this place was smaller. The tiles were a worn, creamy color. The air smelled of salt, and the ceiling fan made a soft, rhythmic clicking sound. But it was warm. Not warm from the temperature, but from the feeling. It was just enough. Just enough for 4 women, and one picture frame in the middle. I placed the photo of Caleb on the wooden dining table, right next to a vase of wildflowers the owner had left for us. It was a medium-sized frame with a walnut border. The picture I chose was of him laughing, his head tilted back slightly, his eyes squinting from the sun. "So he can have a seat at the table too," I said. Odette nodded. Selma gave the frame a little bow, as if greeting an old friend. Lois touched the edge of the frame gently, then took out a tissue to dab her eyes. We had a simple dinner. I made a white bean soup with carrots and parsley. Nothing fancy. It was the soup I'd cooked all winter after Caleb died, because it was easy to eat, easy to make, and required very little thought. I still remembered his words. Parsley is what makes a simple dish feel decent. Everyone ate with relish. Odette asked for a second bowl, then said, "Does anyone want me to do the dishes?" I placed my hand on hers. No one here has to prove they're still useful. Odette looked up, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something, but she just nodded. She sat back down, letting out a soft, slow breath. After dinner, Selma went out to the beach. She was barefoot, her sandals in her hand, a light jacket tied around her waist. Lois and I sat on the porch steps, watching her. Selma walked slowly, the water lapping at her feet. She looked up at the sky, then turned back toward us. "Has anyone ever written a letter to themselves?" she called out. "I'm about to." Lois laughed out loud. "For the first time all day. What are you going to write?" Selma shrugged. "I think I'll write. You went. No one invited you. But you went." Near the end of dinner, as everyone was starting to get up to wash their hands, I opened my laptop. Not to check my bank account. I had already severed all the links. I just opened my email inbox. 2 new messages. Same subject, travel fund. The first was from Griffin. "We had to use a credit card to sort things out after what happened. Can you return the deposit money? We're in a really tight spot. Maybe just half would be fine. I'll send it back when I'm on my feet again." There was no "Mom, we were wrong." "No, we cut you out of the plan and used your money as if it were our right. Just return the money." I didn't reply. I opened the second email. Sable. She wrote, "I used to say Caleb made everything about himself. I won't let you continue that legacy." Just one line. No greeting, no closing. Like a final, pointed jab. I stared at that sentence. "I won't let you continue that legacy." I don't know why, but in that moment, I smiled. Not a bitter smile, but a smile of understanding. She's afraid of not being able to forget me. I closed the laptop. Without a word. I put it in a desk drawer, stood up, and went to make tea. That night, we sat on the porch, the four of us, the sea breeze rustling the palm fronds. Selma read a short piece she had just written, Odette sketched something in a notebook with a pencil, and Lois knitted a thin wool scarf. Her hands trembled, but her stitches were even. No one mentioned family. No one asked about the kids. No one had to pretend to be happy. But every nod, every soft smile. It said more than words ever could. I looked at Caleb's picture, the porch light glinting off the glass. His face was still smiling, as if he were listening to our conversation. I rested my hand on the edge of the table and whispered to myself, "They remember me, honey." And I didn't have to give them a gift or pay their way. That night, I cleared the dinner table more slowly than usual. Not because I was tired, but because I needed the time. Each plate, each spoon made a small, distinct sound as I placed it in the drying rack, as if the kitchen itself were trying to whisper something to me. Selma was sitting on the porch, writing on a piece of thick, textured paper, the kind I'd seen in the old stationery shop on the corner. Odette was peeling an apple, not to eat, but just to keep her hands busy. And Lois had knitted another row of her scarf, then set it down, picked it up, and set it down again. I went into my bedroom and opened the top drawer of the nightstand. Inside was a small, pale grey cloth bag, the one holding the travel candles I'd bought 3 months ago. 6 small white candles, and 1 lavender-colored one I'd bought separately. It was different from the rest. I had planned to use them on the night of Caleb's memorial, the night I had imagined the whole family gathered together, candlelight reflecting in their glasses, as someone told a story about how he used to push the stroller to the park every Saturday morning. That night never happened. But I still brought the candles. Not because I couldn't forget, but because I hadn't yet allowed myself to say a proper goodbye. I set the candles out on the wooden table on the porch. The sea breeze was still gentle. The smell of salt and dry palm leaves hung in the air. The night sky was brilliant with stars that needed no one to validate their existence. I didn't call everyone over. But they came on their own. One sat down. The second brought a box of matches. The third brought 3 ceramic mugs to put the candles in. No one had to ask. There was no music. No flowers. No one leading the ceremony. But no one felt that anything was missing. I took the first white candle and gave it to Lois. She held it with both hands and placed it in a mug. I struck a match and held it out to her. She looked at the flame for a moment before she spoke, not loudly, but loud enough to hear. I used to think I deserved to be forgotten, because my body wasn't whole anymore. No one said anything. But Odette reached out and gently took her hand. I gave the second candle to Odette. She took it, not speaking right away. There was a faint callus on her knuckle, a mark from the years she spent caring for her husband after his stroke. When her candle was lit, she said, "I used to believe love meant giving until there was nothing left. Now I'm learning that love also means receiving." Selma didn't cry. But her eyes glistened. Not from a fleeting emotion, but from things held in for too long finally being spoken aloud. I gave the third candle to Selma. She didn't hold it with both hands. She placed it directly in the mug, as if she already knew what she wanted to say. "I'm not invisible. I just need someone to be willing to look closer." No one said anything more. But we all nodded, as if that were the closing line we had all been waiting to hear. I lit the remaining 3 white candles one by one for each of them, and one for myself, without needing to say a word. The flames flickered, casting a warm orange glow on our faces. I felt the wind, and it was no longer cold. Not because it had changed direction, but because I no longer felt alone in it. I took the lavender candle from the cloth bag, the last one. It was a different color, a different shape, with a distinct scent. I placed that candle in front of Caleb's picture. The other 3 women were silent. Not because they didn't understand, but because they understood completely. I sat down. I struck one more match. and as the flame touched the wick, I said, just loud enough to hear, "I used to prepare everything for other people, thinking that would keep me connected to them. But it turns out, I had to keep myself connected to me first." I don't know how long I sat there, looking at that candle, but I saw his face in the picture, and he no longer seemed distant, no longer like a faded memory, but like a part of this place, a place with light, with wind, and with people sitting around me who needed no reason to stay. No one got up right away. We sat there until the sea breeze made the flames dance and lean. But none of the candles went out. They just leaned toward each other, just like us. Not perfect, but still burning. That morning, I woke up before everyone else. There was no alarm. Just the sea breeze pushing through the gap in the curtains, waking me. The sun hadn't fully risen. The light was still a pale blue, just enough to make out the shape of Caleb's frame on the wooden table, the edges catching the last of the moonlight. I draped a thin shawl over my shoulders and walked out of the villa, barefoot. The sand was cool, soft, and slightly damp, like a greeting from the ocean. I set my phone on a low rock near the water's edge. I opened the unread messages. 3 from Griffin. 1 from an unknown number. Probably one of his colleagues. But I didn't open them. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed to hear anything to decide how I would live the rest of my life. The wind began to pick up. Half of my shawl slipped from my shoulder and fell onto the sand. I looked at it, and didn't bend down to pick it up. I turned back toward the small path leading to the villa. Each footstep in the sand left a print, which the waves erased almost immediately. I thought, maybe most of life is like that. Things we think are permanent marks are really just a bit of light foam, here and then gone. I opened the small mailbox hanging by the villa door, where the owner left service notices and flyers for paddleboarding tours. Inside was a single postcard. The front was a picture of a deserted beach, with a lone beach chair sitting under the shade of a palm tree. I flipped it over. Selma's familiar handwriting, soft, small, and neat. To myself, congratulations on not collapsing when no one else saw you standing. I read it 3 times. Then I tucked it into my breast pocket. Not as a souvenir, but because I knew that sentence was for me too. I walked back to the beach. This time, I walked right at the water's edge. The waves lapped at my ankles, cool and refreshing. I looked out toward the horizon, where the sky and the ocean met like a perfectly stitched seam. I thought of Juniper. I remembered the look in her eyes during that video call from the airport. Not blaming, just confused. A look too young to understand that not all adults are right, and not everyone who is silent is compliant. I closed my eyes and imagined her one day asking, "Why didn't you help?" I don't know if I'll be alive to see that day. But I hope if someone answers for me, they will say, "Because your grandmother chose to save herself first." I took out my phone and pried off the back cover. I pulled out the SIM card. A tiny, thin piece of plastic, no heavier than a strand of hair. But I felt my shoulders lighten as I let it drop into the sea. There was no plink as it fell. No one to witness it. But I knew. And that was enough. Lois was peeling a kiwi, her hands shaking slightly, but her smile was bright. Odette was making coffee, the aroma of Arabica filling the house. Selma was arranging flowers in a small vase, wildflowers she'd picked on her walk that morning. There was a single sprig of lavender, placed right next to Caleb's frame. No one told her to do that. But someone did. I stood there for a moment, just watching. Then I walked in. No permission needed. We ate breakfast together, a plate of fruit, slices of whole grain toast, a little almond butter, and hot peppermint tea. Everything was simple. But it was warm. Not warm because of the food. But because for the first time in years, I knew I was in the middle. Not because I paid for it, not because of a title, but because I was chosen. And because I had chosen them. I used to think I had been left behind. I used to believe my value was in how much I could give. But the truth was, I just hadn't been walking in the right direction. The people who needed me, they were here now. And I was in the middle of them. Not needing to be forgiven. Not needing to be honored. Just needing to be present, as I was. I don't need an apology anymore. I need my freedom. And I chose it. No one gave it to me, and no one gave me permission. If you have ever, even once, felt yourself fading in a room you used to call home, share with me below. I'm listening. People like us, we're still here. And this time, we will not be silent.